She hadn't acted out. She hadn't spoken back. Her only offense was being different from the rest. While Camilla's grandchildren were applauded for their mess and noise, Charlotte was corrected for the smallest things, even blinking the wrong way, and behind a single locked door, inside the Queen Consort's private rooms, that correction crossed a line. It turned violent. No one noticed, because no one bothered to ask. Until one day, someone did see. A royal guard witnessed it. Camilla grabbed Charlotte by the ear, clamped a hand over her mouth, and dragged her down the hall. That was the moment he stopped standing still. He forced his way into her room, pulled Charlotte out with bruises marking her skin, and set off an emergency that ripped through the palace. When Prince William later saw the CCTV footage, there was no pause. No consultation with the crown. Camilla was removed for good. So before we show you the instant protocol collapsed, when authority meant nothing, and one guard risked everything, ask yourself, would you have turned away? Let us know in the comments, like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because this wasn't just a royal controversy, this was the day a guard chose a child over a queen. The palace ran on rules, some written, some spoken aloud, and others that lived quietly between silence and eye contact. Staff Sergeant Callum Reeves understood all of them. He'd had to. 9 years in royal protection, 15 before that in rigid posts where uniforms mattered less than knowing how power flowed. And inside Buckingham Palace, power moved like weather, unpredictable, impossible to control, but easy to sense once the pressure shifted. That afternoon, the atmosphere was cheerful. Queen Camilla walked through the Western Garden corridor with 2 of her grandchildren from her first marriage, 7-year-old twins, smiling wide, faces smeared with chocolate. One had tracked muddy footprints along the marble baseboards. The other sent a decorative vase, wobbling before it tipped over with a dull crack. "Oh, darling!" Camilla laughed softly, kneeling to brush dirt from his trousers. "Don't worry about that ugly thing. It was dreadful anyway." The staff remained still. No one rushed to clean the mess. That would wait until she disappeared around the corner. Callum observed without reaction. Judgment wasn't his job. His duty was threat, risk, irregularity. Still, something tightened behind his ribs. 20 minutes later, Princess Charlotte passed through the same corridor. No chocolate stains, no running, no smile. Her school uniform was immaculate. Hair neatly pinned, posture stiff with the discipline of a child trained for constant visibility. She walked alone, despite protocol requiring an escort this far from the family wing, a minor violation. But Charlotte wasn't careless. If she was unaccompanied, someone had either allowed it or overlooked her. Callum noticed immediately and logged it mentally. Charlotte didn't look up. Normally, she offered guards a soft nod, sometimes only a glance. Today, her head stayed down. He didn't intervene. She wasn't crying. She wasn't visibly upset. She was simply muted. Flat where there should have been depth near the end of the corridor, she paused, briefly adjusted the collar of her blouse, 2 fingers pressing lightly at her throat, then continued on. Later that afternoon, the Wales children assembled in the South Garden for scheduled outdoor lessons. Camilla appeared again, moving with a quieter intent this time. A look toward the instructor, a murmured word, and Charlotte was separated from the group. Not forcibly, not obviously, just repositioned. Her younger brothers stayed behind on the lawn. From Callum's vantage point, nothing crossed a clear line. No touching, no raised voice, but Charlotte never returned to the others. And when she emerged from a hedge-lined side path 15 minutes later, her eyes snapped once toward Camilla's back before she quickly looked away. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was starting to form a pattern. One of Camilla's granddaughters spilled a tray of paints across the stone floor. Camilla clapped, laughing. What a talent, an abstract masterpiece. Charlotte knocked over a single cup of water and was promptly escorted inside. No lecture, no drama, just a gesture, and she was gone. That evening, as shifts rotated and the fading light stretched shadows along the palace halls, Callum Reeves signed off his post log and completed his digital check-in. But instead of returning to the barracks, he paused in the corridor between the family apartments and the Queen Consort's private suite. The same hallway where, hours earlier, Charlotte had touched her collar without even realizing it. He remained there longer than necessary. The hallway was spotless, quiet, unchanged, and yet something felt off. Not suddenly, not violently, more like the subtle flecks of stone just before it gives way. He didn't submit a report. He didn't voice concern. Her blouse collar tugged askew. Camilla said something the audio couldn't catch, but the tone was unmistakable, sharp, slicing. She pointed toward the space near the fireplace. Charlotte hesitated. Camilla reached for a slim wooden pointer from the side table, likely decorative, something meant for artwork or maps, and gestured again. Charlotte complied. She moved to the corner, turned, and lifted her hands to her ears. Not covering them, holding them, as if she'd been told exactly how, elbows angled out, eyes fixed ahead. Camilla began pacing. Her voice rose and fell in an angry rhythm. At one point, she snatched up a velvet cushion and hurled it, not at Charlotte, but at the floor near her feet, deliberate, demonstrative. Then she stepped closer, one strike clean. Across the legs with the pointer, Charlotte flinched, but didn't move. Another strike, then another. Camilla's voice climbed just enough for the microphone to catch it. You think your mother's blood makes you untouchable. You're not even mine. You don't belong here, and you will learn obedience. Charlotte shut her eyes. A single tear slid down her cheek. Camilla slapped her, open hand, sharp across the face. Charlotte staggered sideways but stayed upright. Camilla dropped to one knee, gripping the child by the chin, speaking again lower now. Charlotte nodded. Once, then twice. Automatic, Camilla stood, straightened Charlotte's blouse, smoothed her hair, and walked out, leaving her in the corner. Charlotte stayed frozen for nearly a full minute before lowering her arms. When she finally left, it was through the opposite corridor. The one without cameras. Callum paused the feed. His hands shook. Not from surprise. He'd felt this coming since the corridor incident, but from the raw brutality of seeing it confirmed. This wasn't harsh discipline. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was intentional cruelty wrapped in entitlement. The worst part wasn't the stick or the slap. It was how rehearsed it all was. How Charlotte hadn't resisted, hadn't cried out, hadn't begged. She simply followed instructions. Callum shut down the feed, exported the file, encrypted it, and saved it onto a secure drive he wore in a waterproof pouch around his neck. He stared at the blank screen long after. If he reported this officially, it would be slowed, softened, dissolved. There would be questions about his unauthorized access, about the override, about why he hadn't intervened earlier, and Camilla would explain it away. A corrective session, a misbehaving child, a family matter, footage taken out of context. He'd seen it before, not this exact scenario, but the same decay hidden beneath titles and protected by politeness. Not this time. He'd seen the child, and he wasn't letting her walk into that room again. The next morning, Callum spoke to no one, not his supervisor, not his team, not even the family liaison officer who casually asked whether the Wales children needed adjusted coverage for the afternoon outing. He carried out his duties with mechanical precision, while the truth pressed against his chest like a boot. He couldn't report this. He knew the system too well. He'd helped write parts of it. Misconduct protocols, safeguards for disciplinary disputes. Every path led to internal review, confidential escalation, family discretion. Submitting the footage through official channels would see it classified and buried under political protection before anyone acted. Even in the best-case scenario, it would take days. Charlotte didn't have days. By noon, Callum returned to the internal monitoring room. Not to watch more footage, he'd seen enough. He sat in front of a digital personnel map, names, clearance levels, allegiances. There were people he trusted, but none who had both the authority and the willingness to move fast enough. If he took this up the chain to a colonel through protocol via a family liaison, it would stall senior palace command. Optics, meetings, damage control, and Camilla would sense it. If she got wind of an accusation, if she moved before the evidence surfaced, Charlotte could be relocated, reshaped, coached into silence, made to recant. It had happened before, maybe not in this family, but in this system. Callum stared at the encrypted drive resting against his chest, its weight unmistakable. There was only one clean ending to this. Charlotte had to be separated from Camilla immediately. Not later, not after reviews now, and only one person could make that call without delay, Prince William. But the Prince of Wales was insulated, buffered by aides, schedules, protocols, etiquette. Raw information didn't reach him directly. To get through, Callum would have to shatter every rule he'd sworn to uphold. He considered sending a message through internal relay, urgent request for private audience with HRH, the Prince of Wales. Matter concerning Princess Charlotte's safety, too slow, too filtered, approaching William's principal aide. That would guarantee the request was. But for the first time since being assigned to the outer detail for the Wales children, Callum made himself a vow. One more incident like that, and I pull the thread. It came 3 days later. Staff Sergeant Callum Reeves was posted on corridor rotation between the South Gallery and the West Stairwell, a known blind zone where diplomatic guests passed without notice and where the Queen Consort's private apartments overlapped with the secondary family wing. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Sunlight washed across polished floors. Footsteps echoed softly. Then Charlotte burst around the corner at a half. Run one shoe slipping loose, hair coming undone, panic carved into every line of her face. She didn't scream. She never got the chance. 2 seconds later, Camilla appeared behind her, seized Charlotte by the upper arm, and with effortless familiarity, pressed a hand firmly over the child's mouth. Callum froze. His mind lagged behind his eyes. Camilla's voice sliced through the corridor, low and sharp. Not another word. Do you hear me? Charlotte's eyes flared wide. She tried to pull away. The grip tightened. Camilla's free hand reached up, twisted Charlotte's ear, and jerked her hard toward the hallway leading to her private suite. Callum stepped forward, then stopped. Camilla didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him at all as she passed. She dragged Charlotte by, not with frenzy, but with the absolute control of someone who believed she had unquestioned authority. And on paper, she did. Charlotte didn't scream. Camilla was family. The Queen Consort carried sweeping jurisdiction within royal quarters. The room they entered was designated off, limits to security unless an explicit threat was declared, and palace protocol lived in more gray areas than anyone liked to admit. The door shut behind them, heavy antique, reinforced hinges, sound, dampened frame, silence. Callum stood there for 11 full seconds, breath locked in his chest, listening. Nothing. He approached, laid his palm against the wood. Still nothing. His hand drifted toward his radio, thumb hovering over the emergency channel. But what would he say? No scream, no visible injury, no declared threat. Logging an incident would trigger a chain reaction. Reports, reviews, interrogations, consequences. And if he was wrong, it wouldn't just cost him his position. It could fracture the fragile trust that royal security was built on. He stepped away from the door, and he walked on. That night, sleep never came. Each time he closed his eyes, Charlotte's face surfaced, not terrified but contained, controlled. The look of someone who knew better than to fight, someone who'd been there before. At 3:14, Callum accessed the entry logs. Camilla's suite door had opened once that afternoon and closed again 13 minutes later. No staff entries, no recorded breach. At 3:27, he submitted a request for personal access to historical security logs from the West Hall corridor, classified as non-urgent for training analysis. He told himself it was routine, a timing check, but he knew better. He just hadn't seen it yet. The palace had blind spots, but far fewer than people assumed. Callum knew that. He'd spent the past 2 years mapping the surveillance system across royal residences, not just camera locations, but the reasoning behind them. Most lenses faced outward, tourists, intrusions, threats, but a select few looked inward, not for gossip, not for scandal, for contingencies. Camilla's private sitting room was one of them. After a 2019 security lapse involving an unescorted aide and an unlocked terrace door, a discreet camera had been installed inside the room, hidden in the ornamental molding above the fireplace, undisclosed, hardwired into a closed circuit inaccessible to standard staff. Only a handful of senior officials even knew it existed. Callum wasn't officially among them, but he knew how to trace wiring, and he knew who to call at 4:12 a.m. without setting off alarms. He didn't ask for footage. He asked for timestamps, dates, durations, entry, and exit inconsistencies. The response wasn't conclusive, but it was enough. Over the previous 6 weeks, the Queen Consort had spent multiple 10 to 15-minute intervals alone in that room with Charlotte. Most of those sessions hadn't appeared on Charlotte's schedule. None were logged officially. And then there was yesterday. Duration, 13 minutes, 40 seconds. Entry, Camilla and Charlotte. Exit, Camilla alone. Charlotte never came back through the monitored door. That was enough. Access required 2 separate overrides, one through the Royal Internal Monitoring System, the other via his former commanding officer's credentials. Borrowed, not requested, unauthorized messy. But he did it anyway. The screen flickered, then locked into focus. Timestamp, 16:07 hours. Audio, partial, low quality. Video, painfully clear. Camilla entered first, hauling Charlotte by the wrist. The girl's braid was coming undone. Her face flushed. Cleaned, softened, diluted before it ever touched the prince's desk. There was only one option left. Find William. Force the meeting. Burn protocol to the ground, even if it cost him his career, even if it ended in cuffs, because anything less meant Charlotte would be taken back into that room. At 13:45, Callum made his choice. He entered the operations room, signed himself off active duty using a forged code, and swapped his uniform jacket for a plain utility vest. Low visibility, low threat profile. He passed 2 checkpoints using outdated override codes from a previous assignment and slipped into the East Corridor during a restricted lull between staff rotations. When Palace security noticed him heading toward the main briefing chamber, the one reserved for senior royal logistics, they assumed clearance, right up until he reached the door, right up until they asked for authorization, right up until he refused. And then, for the first time in his royal detail career, Callum Reeves drew his weapon, not to aim, not to threaten. Just enough to make the message unmistakable: I'm going through that door. You can write me up later, or shoot me now. The guards froze. They didn't stop him. They couldn't. No one knew what to do when a soldier chose a child over his post. Inside the chamber, before half a dozen stunned staff members, Prince William stood mid-briefing. Callum spoke only what mattered. "Sir, forgive the breach. Your daughter is not safe. I have the footage. I have proof. I'll accept court, martial, discharge, or arrest, after you see it." It had started on a Tuesday. Camilla liked Tuesdays. Quiet, predictable, low attendance. Perfect for something small, something easily dismissed. Charlotte had paused during rehearsal for an afternoon presentation. Her bow hadn't been held long enough. One foot was slightly misaligned. Camilla offered a thin smile across the hall and said nothing at the time. But as the group dispersed, her hand, calm to every observer, closed around Charlotte's arm like a grip. No cry, no resistance. Only that familiar, paralyzing compliance Callum now understood for what it was. Survival. He was positioned at the far end of the corridor when it began. Camilla's voice, clipped and cold, carried through stone as she marched the girl past portraits and into the turning hallway toward her private rooms. "Don't look at me like that. You've embarrassed yourself, and me. I won't have you turning into your mother. If you want respect, you'll earn it properly. Now move." Callum moved before thought could catch up. No order, no plan. Just motion down the hall, past the East Wing stairwell, abandoning his assigned post without hesitation. This time, that door was not closing again. By the time he reached the Queen Consort's quarters, Camilla had already pulled Charlotte inside. 2 guards from her detail stood watch. Neither knew why the child had been taken in. Neither questioned it. When Callum approached, fast and off schedule, one raised a hand. "You're not cleared for this section, Sergeant." He didn't slow. The second guard stepped in, hand moving toward his baton. "Sergeant Reeves, stand down." Too late. Callum pivoted, knocked the baton aside, and drove the first guard to one knee with a shoulder strike. The second lunged, but Callum was already behind him, tearing the radio from his vest and ripping it free. There was no shouting, no warnings, just precise, efficient movement. Within seconds, both guards were disarmed, not knocked out, but frozen by shock and the sheer impossibility of what had just occurred. A royal guard assigned to family protection had turned on internal security. Callum didn't hesitate. He faced the door, tried the handle, locked. He stepped back and kicked it in. The crack of splintering wood thundered through the private quarters. Camilla spun around, stunned, her hand suspended mid-motion. Charlotte stood in the center of the room. Her arms were raised above her head, hands gripping her ears, trembling. Tears streamed down her face. Her shoes were gone. Her right knee was scraped raw where she'd fallen. And beside Camilla lay a thin lacquered cane, not ornamental, not ceremonial, used repeatedly. Callum didn't raise his voice. He crossed the room, reached for Charlotte, and lifted her gently from the floor. Camilla stepped toward him, fury flashing. But before she could speak, he met her gaze. Not as a subordinate, not as a subject, as a man with nothing left to protect. Don't speak. Don't move. This is finished. Charlotte clutched him, shaking. She didn't cry. She didn't say a word. Only shallow, broken breaths. The sound of a child who had no strength left to sob. Camilla raised her hand, half disbelief, half outrage. You have no authority to be in this room. Neither do you, Callum replied calmly. Not after what I've seen. He turned and walked out through the shattered doorway, past the stunned, disarmed guards, down the long corridor as alarm klaxons began to echo. He didn't run. Running implied guilt. He moved steadily. Charlotte held against his shoulder as staff froze, stared, and parted to let him pass. By the time he reached the central marble hall, the palace was alive with response. Voices ricocheted off stone. Radios crackled. He's carrying the child. That's Sergeant Reeves. Did he force entry? Get medical now. 2 armed officers advanced from the western wing. Formal security, not family detail. Their weapons stayed lowered, but ready. Sergeant Reeves, stop where you are. He did. Slowly, he knelt and lowered Charlotte to the floor. She stood barefoot, tights torn, the raised welt on her thigh unmistakable. One officer saw it instantly. Charlotte looked up at them. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. One officer dropped to a knee beside her, signaling for medical. The other kept his eyes on Callum. You're being detained for unlawful entry, breach of protocol, and assault. Callum nodded once. I understand. You'll be disarmed and escorted. Understood. They removed his weapon, his badge, his rank insignia. They didn't handcuff him. Everyone in that hall understood what this was. Not an insurrection, a rescue. A medic knelt beside Charlotte, almost immediately, not because of an order, but because her stillness demanded it. The paramedic spoke gently, asking simple questions. Does this hurt? Can you tell me what happened? Did someone hit you? Charlotte stayed silent, but when he reached toward her leg, she flinched sharply and whimpered. That was enough. The medic glanced at the head nurse behind him and gave a single nod. Get the scanner. Minutes later, Charlotte was moved to a sealed medical suite in the East Wing, typically reserved for high-profile guests. Prince William hadn't arrived yet. King Charles hadn't been informed. The machinery of state was still trying to understand what had just occurred. The medical team didn't need explanations. Fresh bruising lined Charlotte's thigh, clean linear marks that matched the cane still lying on the carpet of the Queen Consort's sitting room. Elsewhere, Callum sat in a gray, walled security room. Unrestrained, but under watch, he offered no resistance, no justification. When asked for a statement, he said only one thing. There is footage. They checked. He hadn't been bluffing. Internal control accessed the CCTV archive from Camilla's private quarters. The room had been fitted with discreet surveillance years earlier after a prior health concern, a compromise for safety. The footage had rarely been reviewed. Many with full clearance had forgotten it existed. 2 men in tailored suits, neither military nor liaison, but senior legal operatives assigned directly to royal affairs. Watched the recording together, no audio, no narration. just the fixed, impartial angle of a ceiling camera. They saw the child, the posture, the cane, the strike. They watched it again and again. For 5 full minutes, neither spoke. Finally, one reached for his phone. Alert Windsor Command. Flag the footage for immediate delivery to HR direct. No chain. The next call went to the guard commander. Abai, the book officer, with 2 decades in uniform and a reputation for iron control. He watched the footage once, then again when it ended. He asked only one thing. Is this an isolated incident? The aide hesitated. There are allegations. Nothing logged. Nothing formally proven. The commander folded his hands and leaned forward. There's no such thing as a one-time incident, he said. Only a first-time caught. He reviewed Callum's intake sheet. Violation of protocol, assault on palace security, unauthorized weapon draw. Beside each charge, he made a single notation, temporarily suspended pending conclusion of inquiry. Within hours, Palace Command shifted into full containment mode. But containment was already failing. Too many people had seen Charlotte's injuries. Too many had heard the emptiness in her voice. Medics, legal staff, officers. All of them had arrived at the same unspoken truth. A child had been abused inside the palace by someone untouchable, and someone else, very touchable, had risked everything to stop it. When Prince William's motorcade reached the gates, there was no ceremony. No lines drawn, no salutes, just quiet radio chatter and exchanged looks. No one knew how to receive a prince walking into a crisis that had detonated from within. William hadn't announced his arrival. The vehicles came in faster than protocol allowed, tires crunching across gravel without the usual measured pace. Before the lead car fully stopped, he was already opening the door. He didn't wait for aides, didn't ask for a briefing. He went straight inside the palace, normally responsive to his presence, like a living system, hesitated. Staff moved aside instinctively. Radios dipped. Conversations died mid-word. Something was wrong, and everyone felt it. William moved through the East Wing with long, deliberate strides. His face wasn't angry. Not yet. It was focused. The expression soldiers wore before something irreversible. A senior security officer intercepted him outside the sealed medical suite. Sir, William didn't slow. My daughter, he said quietly. Where is she? The officer stepped aside. Inside, Charlotte sat on the edge of the examination bed, wrapped in a pale blanket far too large for her. A nurse stood close, one hand resting gently on her shoulder. Charlotte's feet didn't reach the floor. William crossed the room in 3 steps and dropped to his knees in front of her. Lottie, he said, his voice breaking once. I'm here. She studied him for a moment, as if checking whether this was real. Then she leaned forward and pressed her face into his chest. He wrapped his arms around her immediately, one hand cupping the back of her head. You're safe, he murmured. You're with me now. Charlotte nodded against him. She didn't cry. She just held on. He stayed like that longer than anyone expected, long enough for the nurse to step back quietly, long enough for the room to empty without instruction. When he finally stood, he didn't release Charlotte's hand. Show me, he said. The senior medical officer didn't speak. She only gestured. William followed her gaze. The injuries were unmistakable. Linear bruises along Charlotte's thigh. Welts already darkening. A faint mark at her wrist, shaped like fingers. William inhaled slowly through his nose, then nodded. Who did this? He asked. Though the answer had already found him. No one replied at first, so he asked again, softer. Who? A legal advisor stepped forward, tablet in hand. Sir, before we proceed, you should know there is recorded footage. Show me. They didn't argue. The video played in a secure room 2 corridors away. William stood throughout. Charlotte sat beside him, now wrapped in his coat, eyes lowered. He didn't make her watch. The screen told the story itself, the entry, the stance, the cane, the strike, silent. Unfiltered, when it ended, William didn't move. He didn't clench his fists, didn't swear, didn't raise his voice. Pause it, he said. Rewind, they did. He watched again. Then he turned slowly to the room filled with senior officers, legal counsel, and command staff. "Where is she?" There was a hesitation, barely a moment. But William noticed it. "Where?" he repeated. "Is Camilla?" "She's in her private suite, sir," someone answered. "Under observation." "Good," William said. "She stays there." He turned back to Charlotte, crouched to her level, and met her eyes. "You don't have to see her," he said gently. "You don't have to talk to her. You don't have to do anything. You don't want to do." He squeezed her hand. "I've got you." Charlotte nodded. William rose. When he addressed the room again, his tone had changed. Level contained unmistakably final. "Effective immediately, Camilla is to have no access to my children. None, direct or indirect. She does not enter family areas. She does not speak to them. She does not send messages. This is not a request." One advisor started to object. William silenced him with a glance. "I will handle my father," he said. "You will handle enforcement." He turned toward the exit. "And bring me the guard," he added, "the one who pulled her out." The room exchanged looks. "He's in temporary detainment," the commander said carefully. "Multiple violations." "Bring him to me," William said. "Now?" As he left, Charlotte's hand in his, the palace seemed to realign around him. The storm had finally found its center. Camilla was still in her suite when the knock came. Not from security, not from staff, from William himself. No warning, no ceremony. She sat in her armchair, a silk shawl draped around her shoulders, her drink untouched on the table. When she looked up, her expression softened into something almost maternal. "William," she said, rising with just enough effort to appear delicate. "I'm told there's been some confusion." He remained standing. "I've seen the footage." Her hand froze mid-adjustment of the shawl. "There must be a misunderstanding," she said, the warmth in her voice dropping a degree. "Children exaggerate." "It wasn't her story," William replied quietly. "It was yours, your hands, your voice, on record." Camilla's lips pressed thin. She reached for water instead of the brandy. "She's a difficult child," she said, as though reciting a prepared defense. "Catherine raised her without discipline. I tried to guide her. She lies. She manipulates. You know how she can be." "Enough," William said. She blinked. "She's a child," he continued. "My child." "And I am your stepmother," Camilla replied evenly. "I've served this family longer than you. You beat her." The words landed hard. Camilla said nothing. William stepped closer, his voice steady. "You slapped her. You struck her with a cane. You dragged her by the ear through these halls, not once, but repeatedly, every time you believed no one was watching." "You weren't meant to see that," she whispered, then caught herself. "I mean," the silence broke something in her. "You think I'm cruel?" Camilla said, her voice rising. "I raised Charles's grandchildren. I endured your wife's looks. And silence, the press, the comparisons, always Diana. I gave this family order when it was falling apart." "This has nothing to do with Diana," William said coldly. "This is about Charlotte." "I was teaching her humility," Camilla snapped. "You taught her fear." They stood motionless. Then William spoke again. "Pack your things." Camilla stiffened. "Excuse me? You are no longer permitted in this residence," he said. "You will vacate your rooms tonight. You will not contact my children. You will not attend family functions. You will not speak publicly about this." "And if I refuse, then I release the footage," William replied. "Every frame, and let the public decide what kind of queen they're looking at." Her breath caught, not in panic, but calculation. It took less than 2 seconds for her to understand. He wasn't bluffing. "Does your father know you're doing this?" she asked. William met her gaze. "He's watching it right now." Elsewhere, King Charles sat alone in his private viewing room. No advisors, no aides, just the footage looping silently. The first time, his hand covered his mouth. The second, it dropped. The third, it curled slowly into a fist. When it ended, he remained still for a long moment. Then he pressed the intercom. "Have her escorted out," he said. "Tonight." No one argued. Not anymore. As the sun dipped behind the palace, Camilla's car rolled out of the rear courtyard. No press, no announcement. Just a quiet exit through the service gate, reserved for staff who'd broken trust or guests who'd overstayed their welcome. Her title remained, for the moment, but in every way that mattered, her reign ended that day. Not with scandal, not with a speech, but with a locked room, a forgotten camera, and a child she never believed anyone would protect. No paperwork was ever formally filed, no tribunal, no charges, no statement explaining what had happened inside those walls. But the people who lived there, the aides, the guards, the cleaners who polished banisters and dusted tapestries, they all knew. They had heard the alarms, they had seen Charlotte led away in silence, wrapped in her father's coat. They had seen the guard led away, wrists bound behind him, posture straight, expression unreadable. It took 48 hours, behind closed doors. The Security Council assembled, medical reports were examined, CCTV timelines reviewed, senior officials cross-referenced household records. There were no leaks, no denials. Piece by piece, the accounts matched. Charlotte had been harmed, Camilla had crossed moral and institutional lines, and the Royal Guard, despite violating multiple codes, had intervened during an active emergency to protect a child from continued harm. The final report was written in the language of bureaucracy, stripped of emotion. Due to exigent circumstances involving immediate risk to a minor, standard protocol was suspended in accordance with Section 4, Subclause 12, of Emergency Protective Action, as interpreted by the Field Commanding Officer in real time. No blame assigned, no public statement issued, just a quiet shift in precedent. By week's end, the guard's name was discreetly removed from the disciplinary ledger. Reinstatement orders followed, issued under Prince William's direct authority, not only reinstated, but promoted captain of the Royal Household Security Detail. The role carried no ceremony, no spotlight, but full oversight. No royal child would ever be taken behind a locked door again without passing through him first. Charlotte was told gently. Her response was simple. She smiled once, then asked when she could see him. They met in the palace garden as late afternoon light stretched shadows across the manicured grass. Charlotte walked toward him with the quiet composure she'd inherited from her mother, but her hand found his naturally, just as it had that night, without asking. He knelt to her height. "I wanted to say thank you," she said. He shook his head. "You don't owe me that, but I still want to." He didn't argue. They stood quietly for a moment, a child, and the man who had broken the rules, broken silence, and broken through a wall to keep her safe. Later, they crossed paths again in the same corridor, where it had all begun. No uniforms, no ranks, no ceremony, just a girl in a cardigan and a man in a plain suit, moving through halls that now followed them with silence. Not fear, not discomfort, but respect. Charlotte walked at her own pace. No one rushed her anymore. "Can I ask you something?" she said, small voice, steady. He nodded. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "You could have lost everything." He looked down at her, not with reverence, not with distance, but like she was simply real. "I didn't do it because you're a princess," he said. Charlotte tilted her head. "I did it," he continued, "because no child should ever feel unsafe in their own home." Her lip trembled once. She didn't cry. "People say you broke the rules." "I did, and that was okay." "No," he said gently. "It wasn't okay. It was necessary." Charlotte looked ahead again. "I hope I'm that brave when I grow up," he smiled. "The kind that doesn't reach the eyes, but carries more weight than words. You already are." In the weeks that followed, change moved quietly through the palace. A second, independent CCTV system was installed. Children's escorts were reassigned based on trust, not rank. Doors that once closed in silence now required clearance from 3 separate layers of protection. There was no announcement, no press release. But the staff felt it. The walls had ears now, and they finally knew who mattered. The guard never sought recognition. Charlotte never needed reassurance. But in the subtle shift of how people moved, where they stood, and how eyes finally met, a new rule took hold. Not just protocol, not lineage. Something older, something truer, duty redefined. So ask yourself, what would you have done if you saw that footage? Should some rules be broken to protect a child? And when silence shields power, who should speak first? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read everyone. If this story stayed with you, like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss tomorrow's episode. And if you know someone who still trusts the surface of power, share this with them. 2 more powerful stories are on your screen now. Watch those next. We'll see you tomorrow.